And a pleasant good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I am Vince Didieri. I'm the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. That guy right there, that's Ryan Roberts. He's the director of recruiting at Irish Breakdown. And that guy right there, he is Brian Driscoll, the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And this is our normal recruiting hour, the Irish Breakdown.
Our new, not our normal, our new.
That's true. But soon to be normal, right?
Soon to be normal.
Yes, this is going to be this is how our Mondays are going to go from now on. This is going to be Ryan. This is going to be kind of his driven show, and we're going to talk recruiting. And we had a lot of recruiting stuff to discuss today. But
the big but, there's always something that happens with the Notre Dame coaching staff. It feels like over the last month plus. And today is no different. John McNulty, the former Notre Dame tight ends coach, is shuffling off to Boston College to be the offensive coordinator. The second position coach for Notre Dame to take a promotion to an ACC school and be an offensive coordinator. And, people are starting to panic a little bit, Brian. So that's where I'm going to throw it to you. People are panicking. Tell them why they should not panic, please.
Well, I mean, this is a good thing for a program. What I kind of get a kick out of is a lot of fans want Notre Dame to be like the big boys and recruit 5 stars and, do all this kind of stuff. Well, then when you see what it's like living on that level, your recruits are going to keep taking visits when they're studs.
Right.
Alabama and other schools are going to keep recruiting your best players. Your coaches are going to get poached for promotions. It's like, wait a minute, hold on a second. I don't like this. Look, here's the reality. If you're seeing coaches leaving for lateral moves, that's a problem. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's not what's happening here, with one exception, and that being Mike Elson, who, Ryan, you have on good authority that if Jim Harbaugh stays, there's a good chance that Mike Elson's going to at least be co-coordinator, which was part of the conversation when he took the job.
Right.
But these are guys leaving for promotions, right? This isn't Charlie Molnar leaving to become the head coach at UMass, which I would argue is a demotion from the OC of Notre Dame because he wasn't being brought back. These aren't guys leaving for Bama for lateral jobs. These are guys that are position coaches that are being hired as coordinators, right? And when you look at Notre Dame in recent years, your last 3 defensive coordinators, one left because he became one of the highest paid assistants in all of college football to go to the SEC, which then springboarded him into a head coaching job, that being Coco. Your next defensive coordinator came here for only 3 years, got an SEC head coaching job. Your next defensive coordinator came and was here for a year, and he got promoted to be the head coach of a top 5 program, a.k.a. Notre Dame.
Right.
When you look on the offensive side of the ball and you see the success that they've had this offseason, you're now seeing that on offense. Obviously, Lance Taylor getting the offensive coordinator job at Louisville, which is a good job. That's a good program. Now you're seeing John McNulty being recruited to go be the offensive coordinator at Boston College. Again, it's a good program. They're a bowl team the last couple of years. Jeff Hafley's an ascending up-and-coming coach. So
absolutely,
you're having your guys poached because people that want to have success are seeing the success you're having, and they're saying, let's get part of that. And then that's not the only reason that John McNulty was hired to BC. I mean, just a little bit of a backstory. BC was pushing for guys with NFL backgrounds. Jeff Hafley spent some time in the NFL. He did that before he went to Ohio State. He was an NFL coach. You look at the hires he's made on offense so far, Cignetti, that's an NFL hire, right? He wanted to run a pro-style offense. He was looking for pro-style, pro background guys in this circuit. I was told by a source yesterday, got turned down by a couple guys that he really pushed for early, and then McNulty jumps on the radar. So the combination of being at Notre Dame, right, with their success, recruiting to a place that has some level of academic standard, which BC does, not like Notre Dame's, but it does. And then 3, he's got an extensive NFL background. Prior to, he spent 2 years at Rutgers as the OC in 18-19.
Right.
Then he was at Notre Dame in 2021. I think, Ryan, what was it, like 9 straight years before that he was in the NFL as a position coach with the Cardinals? Like it was like the Cardinals, Titans, and Chargers, right?
That was the number that I remember was 9 years.
Yeah. And so he has a little bit of the best of both worlds for BC and what BC was looking for, which is – and Notre Dame has run a pro-style spread the last 2 years, which is more along the lines of what Jeff Hafley wants. He wants a pro-style offense. Now, what that's going to look like at BC. Will they be more in the shotgun more? Will they still go under center a ton? I don't know the answers to that, but I know that's what Jeff Hafley was looking for. That's why John McNulty was a guy that he targeted. And again, the reason this is good for Notre Dame is you can now say, hey, fellas, look, you could be the tight ends coach here. You could be the running backs coach here. Two very unglamorous positions, if we're being honest. And you could still get promoted to be an offensive coordinator at a Power 5 school. That's a great selling point for the next batch of coaches that are going to be coming down the road. Plus, the attractive thing about this job is, hey, do you want to coach Michael Mayer for a year? Do you want to coach arguably the deepest tight end room in the country? As I told somebody today, I was like, look, if you can't recruit tight ends to Notre Dame, you need to pick a new profession. And that's what Ryan, that's something you can speak to is this is going to be a super attractive job because of what's already on the roster. But if you can't recruit tight ends to Notre Dame, you're not good at this coaching thing.
Well, and it's simply like, some things transcends just the coaches, right? Like, obviously you need good coaching to maintain what has been built, but even offensive line, to a degree, like we talk about obviously the level under Coach Easton down to what Jeff Quinn obviously had during his tenure, but you're still recruiting really good offensive linemen because offensive linemen want to come to Notre Dame. It's the same deal. Like Notre Dame is tight end you. They're at least in the conversation. They have been working back from the Anthony Basanos, the Jordan Carlsons, all the way up to now Tyler Eifert, now up to the Michael Mayers of the world.
And older people are going to correct you and say Ken McAfee, Dave Casper, Mark Bavaro.
Sure.
Derek Brown, my buddy Oscar McBride's gonna be like, hold on a second. We had me, Derek Brown, and Irv Smith all in the same room at Notre Dame. So your point being, Ryan, this goes back decades.
Oh, for sure.
Tradition.
Yeah, and we actually a few years ago actually had Irv Smith Sr. on a podcast before, so I know Irv pretty well. So like you said, it is set. It goes all the way back a long time at Notre Dame, and people, recruits speaking, are going to want to come to Notre Dame, obviously for the tradition, and then let's call it what it is. Like for the next cycle or two, they want to be Michael Mayer. They want to be the next Michael Mayer. So you're walking into a coaching job now where you have a guy in place that it's not so much, and this is no disrespect to Coach McNulty or whoever the next tight end coach is. It's a little more for them. I want to be Michael Mayer, not so much who I want to be coached by at the position. I want to be that guy that's going top 15 in the draft next year. I want to be that. I want to be Kyle Hamilton at the safety position. Like those guys are the trendsetters. They're they set the table for the next generation of players. So I don't think that who doesn't want to be Michael Mayer right now coming out of high school football?
Right. Well, and you talk about tight end if you think about the 2020 season, Michael Mayer was basically Notre Dame starting tight end, right? They played a lot of 13 personnel. The number 2 and number 3 tight ends, I believe, Ryan, you correct me, you watch a lot more NFL than I do. I believe both of them, the number 2 and number 3 tight ends on last year's team, one was the 3rd round pick, one went undrafted. They were starting in the NFL by the end of the season. Yeah. Right. Am I correct? Brock Wright caught multiple touchdowns down the stretch.
Yep.
Right? He was the 3rd tight end last year. Tommy obviously started for the Panthers this year.
Absolutely.
So yeah, when you're producing your backup tight ends are going on to be starters in the NFL, it's a good situation to be in. And I kind of put a tweet out earlier, kind of joking of it was like this Black Friday mass hysteria rush into a store at the mall, and I was like, this is coaches trying to get to Notre Dame to coach Michael Mayer in that tight end room. And it was kind of a joke, but look, I don't have any people say, who are the early names? I don't have any, but what I can tell you is Marcus Freeman's phone is blown up, and it's been blown up since yesterday when the news first leaked that John McNulty was looking. There's a lot of people that A, want to work with Coach Freeman. B, Tommy Rees is a really well-respected offensive mind. And C, that position specifically. There were some big candidates that were pushing for the receiver's job. Now they went a different direction, but they had some big names on the board. And let's be honest, the receiver room is in the tight end room from a perception and an outside perception standpoint. So,
from an on-field production standpoint,
that's
already.
What I'm referring to.
Yeah, absolutely.
One guy set a program. John, we talk about all that tight end tradition. Well, Michael Mayer just set the single season record at Notre Dame for catches, yards, and touchdowns.
Right.
So things are going pretty good. and we could spend this whole show on all the tight ends that have come through Notre Dame over the years. We're not going to do that. But the point is, this is a good thing for the program. We'll get into recruiting. I'm going to let you guys handle the recruiting part. But when you're losing assistants to coordinator jobs at the Power 5 level, that's a good sign.
Yes.
Now, Tommy Rees, he was a trusted assistant of Tommy Rees. I get that. I guarantee you Tommy Rees wasn't begging John McNulty to stay because he understands the tremendous opportunity this is for John McNulty, right? Mm-hmm. Now he's just going to go hire somebody that also is going to do a good job. So, this is part of the business. When you win and you have success, and the Notre Dame offense down the stretch this past year, look, their two best players were who? Michael Mayer and Kyron Williams. People watched them and said, hey, those guys know what they're doing. Let me go hire that guy to run my whole offense.
Right.
That's a good thing because now it makes it a lot easier to hire the next guy. And so I know there's some panic amongst some people. And I think the fear that some people have is like, do guys not want to coach with Marcus Freeman? If John McNulty didn't want to coach with Marcus Freeman, he's had plenty of assistant coaching jobs, lateral moves he could have left for. Plenty, including going back to the NFL, which is something I was told he was considering before Brian Kelly left because he didn't like working for Brian Kelly. So he would not have stayed on staff if he didn't want to coach with Tommy Rees and Marcus Freeman.
Right.
That's not what this is about. This is Notre Dame is a top program, and people want their coaches. That's how it works. So, remember when Brian Kelly's like, this is the way it is. Get used to it, which was a dumb comment. This is one of those times where it's appropriate. Get used to this, right? Because if these coaches are as good as we think they're going to be, they're not going to be here long, or it's just going to be a constant thing of people trying to poach those coaches. But again, the more that happens, the easier and easier it gets to go out and get top candidates because A, Notre Dame is paying more money now for assistants, and B, this is where you want to be.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, this is where you want to be.
You want guys getting jobs that are promotions.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'll echo what you said at the beginning in case people are late joining us. If people were leaving for, lateral moves, position coaches, positions at other schools, that's when you start to worry. They're getting promoted, like going from a tight ends coach to an offensive coordinator, going from running backs coach to offensive coordinator. Those are promotions, and people leave for promotion. It's the same way at high school. I will never fault a guy for going to a different school for a promotion. Never in a million years. It's when they go for what would appear to be a lateral move. Then you're like, okay, what's the real story here?
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's what's happening at Notre Dame. They're not saying, sorry, don't want to coach for Marcus Freeman, because they were all on board when Marcus took over. They were all on board. They had all signed contracts. They were all on board. They got promoted. And again, that's what you want, and that's what you need to expect if you're going to continue to have success. And I also think that this could be, again, a great move for Marcus Freeman because he has the opportunity to he has an opportunity to put the coaching staff together in his likeness, right? The way he wants to put it together. Yeah. I think that's a good move.
And we'll talk about this. I think this will be a good topic for later in the week, which is the benefits of Marcus Freeman being able to completely remake his staff, because it doesn't happen often that you get this opportunity on a successful program.
Yes.
Normally, when you are promoted from within, you sort of have to inherit what was already there, which for me, I don't think is necessarily a good thing. So in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. So I think this is a blessing in disguise for Marcus Freeman as well. And for Tommy Rees, which we'll get into in a future show. People didn't come here to talk for 20 minutes about John McNulty and tight ends. This is a recruiting show. So I'm going to bow out and let you guys handle the recruiting. So thanks for letting me come on and talk about McNulty leaving. But let's get down to some business, fellas, and I'm going to be watching too and find out, kind of how this weekend went and who's on commit watch and to hear Ryan answer all the other great questions we have about recruiting. So talk to you all later.
Appreciate it, Brian.
All right, Ryan. So let's just jump right in here. This is the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. This is a new feature, new and going to be a normal feature on Mondays, which is exciting. So it'll either be me or Brian, or eventually it'll be you, my friend. And so let's just jump right in. We got a lot of stuff to get to. This weekend was huge for Notre Dame. It was a huge junior day. If anybody's on social media, they obviously saw all the videos and the updates and all of that. but there were no commitments over the weekend. Is that something that Notre Dame should be worried about?
No, I don't think so, because I think everything that was trending in the right direction was still trending, outside of after the weekend was over. So I know everybody, of course, everybody wants there to be commits, right? Like you want to get something to get excited about. But the good news about, this show and about the weekend is that we'll be able to fill you guys in with the things behind the scenes, what is trending in the right direction. So, you're not going to get like, oh, this guy committed, this guy's a silent commit, all those good stuff today. But what you're going to get is that it was a very successful weekend, despite the fact that, and I don't know how many people out there are from, Northeast, but it was not the best weekend for travel, to say the least. I had about 6 to 10 inches of snow in here in New Jersey. It was not a great weekend for travel. It just was not. But yet still, I think we ended up having three recruits that did not make the trip. Tamir Robinson, linebacker, Luke Montgomery, and 2025 quarterback Ryan Montgomery are both from Massachusetts. They did not, unfortunately, make the trip, which I think was obviously, due to a lot of the travel situations.
Weather related, yeah.
Exactly. So we still had a great turnout. A lot of great kids. Every commits or uncommitted player that was there spoke incredibly highly. One recurring thing that I think was fun too is that we got a little insight into some of the new coaches, which I think is a lot, because I had a couple, Ronan Haniffin, and a couple recruits that were talking about this is their first time really seeing Chancey Stuckey, the new wide receiver coach, firsthand and being able to talk to him. And it seems like Notre Dame really knocked it out of the park. They spent the Saturday nights kind of in conclusion going to the hockey game to kind of experiencing that atmosphere a little bit. So seems like from the outside perspective, everything went incredibly well. Everything that I've taught, every player that I've talked to spoke very highly of the event. Every parent that I talked to spoke very highly of the ability to be on campus, get the tour, see the coaches, talk one-on-one, see what the vision is for each one of these recruits if they do make this their destination, and then also getting 3 of the committed recruits back to campus in Drake Bowen and Brandon Vernon. And I'm missing one. Oh, and Cedric Irvin Jr., the running back out of Florida, were all in attendance, which I think in those events specifically, getting those guys back, the committed players, to be around the uncommitted guys, the guys that are still testing the waters, seeing where they fit, having kind of that nucleus, I think is big for this week. So I think that everything just kind of taking a step back, I think it was a big weekend for Notre Dame. And I think that there are going to be some commits in the near future to follow. So.
Well, that was a great set. See, you're a pro at this already. Great segue to the question that Brian just pulled up for us from Q Kibbs. He says, anyone on commit watch after junior day? Seemed like some guys left with great impressions.
They absolutely did. And it's a great question. And the one guy that I just keep coming back to is Ronan Haniffin, who is a athlete, recruited as an athlete. He's out of Buckingham, Brown, and Nichols School, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Notre Dame is on him on either side of the football. And I put up a piece, I think it just went live a few minutes ago at Irish Breakdown. So if you want to go take a look, it kind of gives you a little insight. I spoke to Ronan. I also spoke to his father, Dan, just about the weekend and how everything went. They got back safe. Everything was great, but they spoke about just answering some of the unanswered questions, what the fit is overall, but also being able to sit down, not only with Coach Stuckey, Coach Reese, Coach Freeman, but also seeing what the vision is for him. And the great thing is that they see him as a player that can do that can impact and help them win football games on either the offensive or defensive side of the ball. And they're giving him the option to kind of forge his own path and decide what he wants once he gets on campus. Like they'll give him feedback. Like, this is where we think that your potential is. This is where we think that you can make the biggest impact. But if he wants to play on the defensive side of the football or the offensive side of the football, he'll have the opportunity to do so. So I think that Ronan originally he wanted to take a few visits. He wanted to, really do the due diligence of the process. I think that process is getting sped up very fast here. So he's a kid that I think it could be sooner than later for Notre Dame to potentially get that commit. And I think that he would be a great addition. I think that he is far superior to what his ranking might say. I'm a big fan of what his game is. And I know another guy that in the process of speaking to, I don't know if I would quite call him on commit watch, but Devin Houston, the defensive lineman out of St. James School in Maryland, is a player that is extremely interesting. The DC, Maryland area has a couple really talented defensive line prospects, including him and Jason Moore, who were both kind of being viewed as more of the interior players moving in. And I think that they made a big impression on him. And I think the offensive linemen also were really impacted by kind of being firsthand. Obviously, we saw Coach Easton has been hitting the trail pretty hard, but Sullivan Absher, an offensive lineman out of Belmont, North Carolina, that would kind of be the other guy that I would really point to as being maybe in the fold here pretty soon, because I think that he again is doing his due diligence, but since the day he got the Notre Dame offer straight from his mouth, Notre Dame was in the mix. No matter what, they're always going to be in that top group for him. And I think seeing Coach Easton, talking to him, because Coach Easton actually went to go see Sullivan at his high school the day before he made the trip to South Bend. So he saw him a lot in about a 48-hour stretch there. So I think that relationship's big. And I think that he's another player that could be on commit watch for the players that visited this past weekend.
Bobby S. says, who are Harry Hiestan's top offensive line targets, and does he have a big board yet? Again, the transitions are just seamless.
Yeah, well, the great thing is that he's kind of showing us his hand because he's making a lot of trips. He's been on the road, so we can kind of pace it together. And I would say that his biggest targets right now is originally Luke Montgomery out of Findlay in Ohio, was a guy that was being recruited as a defensive lineman. Well, now Notre Dame is targeting him on the offensive side of the football as well now. So they was supposed to make the trip, obviously was not able to, but I know that Coach Easton has been in constant communication with Luke to really try to get that one turned in Notre Dame's direction, because it wasn't trending towards Notre Dame. It was trending away from Notre Dame. Now Coach Easton's trying to get that one back on track. I think Monroe Freeling is another guy that I really like this film a lot. He is out of Oceanside Collegiate Academy out in South Carolina. Would have told you that it was kind of split between Notre Dame and getting him out of the Carolinas. All those Carolina schools are on him hard. The Clemsons, the North Carolinas, the NC States, they are really trying to keep him in that region. But I feel really good about where Notre Dame is with Monroe Freeling. So he would be a guy that is definitely there. Perhaps the biggest outside of potentially Luke Montgomery, I think, is Samson Ankulola, the offensive tackle out of Thayer Academy. Another guy that Coach Easton was at his high school in the past week. So priority, Chase Basantis from Don Bosco Prep would be another guy. I think he's more of an interior guy personally, but he's being recruited as an offensive tackle, interior player. Where does he fit potentially? And then Charles Jugasa, who is out of Alleman High School in Rock Island, Illinois, seems to be another guy that Notre Dame is making a priority. So we're seeing some of the same names that have kind of been on the board already. But now with Coach Easton, we're getting, I think, a really good understanding of where the board lies, because we're seeing him on the road. What people feared, how Coach Easton hates to go on the road. Well, he's making his rounds, and I think he's kind of making it well known who the guys are that he really feels good about.
And it looks like Brian is jumping in here. He's got he's got names here. So Monroe Freeling, Samson Okanolola, Luke Montgomery, Charles Jagusa, Sullivan Absher. See, I'm going to butcher all of these names because these are all crazy. Chase DeSantis and Austin Sieraveld.
Yep. Well, we touched on, and I touched on Sullivan Absher, who was on the trip, who I think could be a guy that is trending well in Notre Dame. And then Brian added Austin Sieraveld, who was also on campus this past weekend as well. So yes, that pretty much covered everybody there.
Thanks, Brian. Should have been nice to know that ahead of time. That's all right. I see. Now, if they all come to Notre Dame, I'm going to have to learn their names anyway. So this is just good practice. All right. This is just good practice. Can you give us a Q Kibbs has a compliment here. Dang, Ryan is really good at this. He makes following our recruiting very easily. And I'm guessing he wants me to not read all of those that come up, but that's okay. All right. Ryan, can you give us a Christian Gray update and kind of where things stand with him?
Yeah, and Sean Davis has been kind of in touch with Christian pretty extensively, of course, being the defensive back recruit Christian Gray, who just did make the trip. He's from DeSmet High School out in St. Louis, Missouri. He's been a guy that was trending very well in the Notre Dame's direction. And then it kind of got, it seems that he is kind of pushing back his decision because he wants to, and it's not so much him as much as people around him want him to make a really sound decision here. So he's a guy that is, I would say, Notre Dame's still in a very good shape with. I would have said even before I started on this job that I feel that he was, potentially going to be in this class. I felt very good about where a guy like Christian Gray was. There is some trips that are going to be made. He's going to be out to LSU pretty soon here, and he does have a connection with the Tiger staff. Actually, it was his head coach early on in his career. Is actually now on the defensive staff over there. So They're recruiting him hard. I think it's going to be a battle. I still feel good about this one, but Christian Gray's timeline has kind of been expanded a little bit, and he had a really nice visit from everything that I could gather. Sean's, like I said, been in constant communication with him, but there are obviously other schools that are high on Christian Gray and are making their rounds as well with him.
Okay. One of the things that we are going to do with this show every Monday is you do a written mailbag piece, a recruiting mailbag piece that goes out on Monday, and you're going to pick 2 to 3 questions or so that you think are really good that you want to bring up on the show. So let's dive into that now. So your first question from B Plents 1189: who are 2 to 3 realistic defensive line targets that you think would pair best with Keeley and Vernon in the 23 class?
Yeah, so this is another thing I've covered pretty extensively. If you go onto the site, we talked a little bit about, it's an article about defensive line fits in this class. So obviously with Brennan Vernon, more of a strong side defensive end, and Keon Keeley, he can play strong side down the road, I believe, but right now more of that Viper mold at 6'6", 235 pounds. With them already in at the defensive end positions, we're going to be really talking about the interior. Yeah. What's the interior class going to look like? I'm sure they would not. If there was another great defensive end that wanted in the class, I'm sure they would not hesitate to add in him. But I really think that adding to that interior, figuring that out. So the main guy for me, and I talked extensively, again, go check out that piece. I really think I kind of went really in depth on a lot of the players that they're taking a look at. But Jason Moore is my top guy, and I think he's very high on Notre Dame's board, to say the least. He's out of DeMatha Catholic in Maryland, which I think that Notre Dame, and I've talked to Brian with this pretty extensively, I think getting into that Maryland, D.C. area is going to be a huge, huge opportunity for Notre Dame here. And when I spoke to Jason, he talked about the transition from DeMatha Catholic and what they provide for them in preparation. The transition to Notre Dame isn't even as daunting as maybe for some potential recruits, because he feels like he's adequately prepared. So he's high on Notre Dame. I'm high on him as a player. I know the staff's high on him as a player. So he's a guy that I really like, and he kind of brings a lot of length to the position that I think is interesting. He's a kid that plays mostly defensive end at DeMatha. So I think that he's a kid that could move inside and out, kind of, work 5-tech, 4-eye, 4, 2 or 3. Maybe we're eventually on a dime packages. We're working him from a nose. Like, there's a lot of different things I think you can do with a guy like Jason Moore, and moving those defensive linemen around, I think, could be a interesting proposition. And if you haven't checked out the YouTube breakdown that we did last Wednesday, that was at 8:00, and we're starting to do those every week, by the way, breaking down some film. We talked a lot about how Notre Dame is really valuing the length of the position and work and making guys fit. It's always been the best 5 on offense, but I think now moving on that defensive side of the ball, finding how these players fit, finding the best 4 up front or best 3, depending on what front they're running, I think is going to be huge. So all that to say is another guy that kind of fits that similar mold to Jason Moore is Devin Houston, who was just on campus that I talked about a little bit. Again, he's out of Maryland as well, St. James School. 6'5", 270. He plays mostly on the edge like Jason does, but they also move him more inside. I've seen him in a 5. I've seen him in a 4. I've seen him in a 4-eye. So he's already starting to make that transition. If you see his body, I think he's definitely an interior guy moving forward. He's going to bring a lot of size to that position, which I'm excited about. So, and then the last guy I would just throw out there is, I think that another interior player that's more of what you might call a traditional player, I think, is KJ Sampson, who is another North Carolina kid who is listed at 6'3", 285 pounds. I think eventually he's going to be 300 plus. I kind of compared him a little bit to Haskell Garrett that now plays at Ohio State. I think he's got a really nice first step, but he's kind of a squattier frame. He doesn't have a ton of length, but he's more that traditional interior player. So I would say Moore, Sampson, and and Devin Houston are guys for me that I think are right at the top of that interior defensive line class. And I think their fits are a little different depending on what you're talking about, but I think they really stylistically do fit with Keon Keeley and Brandon Vernon pretty well.
Helps if I unmute myself.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Our next question comes from Chancey Stuckey's Hoodie, which is
great name.
Great name. Another that goes on the top 10 list for great names. Do you think there is a position that is strong enough now, including incoming 2022, that if we missed in 23, we would still be okay? And this is kind of a loaded question because there were a lot of loaded positions in 22, but again, you don't really want to miss on any positions per se, but how did you answer this one?
Yeah, I mean, I went from a kind of a whole roster perspective. I didn't just kind of parlay it to just the 2022 class. So I kind of cheated a little bit, just kind of like looking what the numbers are for a little bit. So I said, and this is never going to happen, but I think honestly, if offensive line, if they didn't hit on anybody in the 2023 cycle with the roster that they have coming back, the numbers, I think they would be okay. Like, obviously, you never want to skip a class with offensive linemen because that's a paramount position, right? So, like, you would never do that. But in the worst case scenario, I don't think that they would be, starved for talent moving forward. I think there's a lot of talent there for Coach Heastan to work with Notre Dame. But the one that I really fixated on, and again, this is on the Mailbag piece that was released today on Irish Breakdown. So if I'm talking too fast for you, please go take a look at it because I think I highlighted a little better than maybe my words are going to put out there. But the linebacker position for me, Vince, I think is like number one, honestly. They just got, with the 4-man class that they just had with Snead and Burnham and Ziegler and Tuilakamaka. I think I completely butchered that last name, by the way.
Good, it's not just me today, so that's okay.
It's a great class, man. And honestly, I think that it's really allowing them to kind of swing for the fences with the linebackers. I mean, they already signed Drake Bowen, who's pretty much consensus top 100 player across all recruiting platforms. I think they may add one more linebacker, but if they stopped right now at linebacker, I think they're fine. Yeah. after that 4-man class, still having eligibility, obviously, with like guys like Maris Loifau and the kid that they signed last year, really at Prince Kali and all those guys. Like, linebackers are going to be in very good hands, even if 2023 isn't a fantastic class. But fortunately, they are also still adding great guys like Drake Bowen. So they're going to be in good spots at linebacker, I think, moving forward.
Agreed. The next question comes from our Padre up north, Father David Penny. He says 2 questions. Outside of quarterback, what is the position of greatest need in the 2023 class?
Well, from depth, it's wide receiver, right?
Yeah,
like, I don't. They have 7 guys on the roster right now.
Yeah, so, and obviously everybody's hoping that maybe Xavier Watts moves over and adds to the depth, maybe even a JoJo Johnson, depending on injury and such. But yeah, sure. I mean, that's from a depth standpoint, they need numbers. I mean, you want elite, but you also need numbers.
Yeah, and I think from the transfers we've seen this offseason too, that obviously hasn't helped anything, right? Like we saw a lot of players, and because I'm kind of moving into also, I think safeties, defensive back in general is a big point of emphasis, but wide receiver from just a number standpoint, because then after this season, you're potentially losing Avery Davis, you're losing Braden Lenzy, you're losing Joe Wilkins Jr. So you're losing 3 more guys who are kind of the mentors and the veterans of the group. So that's a big one for me. Defensive back, I think, is a huge one too, in a different sense of, I think there is, we've obviously seen a couple safeties choose to leave, KJ Wallace and, a couple other guys this offseason. But I think that we're talking about Cam Hart is your guy at cornerback. We know this. Very talented player from an NFL draft perspective. I think he has a chance to go potentially top 100 next year. I think that he's a very talented player. You got Brandon Joseph coming in from Northwestern, who has a couple years of eligibility, but there is a real reality, in my opinion, that Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph, this might be their last season on Notre Dame, right? So now we're talking about not only replacing numbers, but also replacing your 2 best players. So getting a good class to continue to add to the Ramon Hendersons and Xavier Watts if he stays there, and the young corners that they have like Ryan Barnes and the talented kids that they have coming in. I think that those positions, specifically secondary and on the offensive side of the football, wide receiver, are paramount for them to really start to get really good classes in 2023.
All right. Did I miss anything from our outline, or are we good?
I think we got it. Okay. So if there's any miscellaneous questions, I think
I've been starring questions over here. So let's see where we're at. We already covered that one. There we go. From Toe Jam. Who from Michigan's 22 and 23 classes would Notre Dame be poaching if and when Harbaugh leaves?
Well, I think when you're talking about Michigan, and I'm going to pull up the board in front of me just to see like who is on that board for them right now that Notre Dame has had interest in or continues to have interest in. But I think the biggest thing is the biggest repercussion for Coach Harbaugh. And we've talked a lot about this on the message board. And I would definitely say if you are not on the message board, you should be on it because there's a lot of great info that is put in there that is not made public to the to everyone until usually when things are kind of concluded and all that good stuff. So I would say, though, the biggest impact Coach Harbaugh potentially leaving is we're in a battle right now with Michigan and Michigan State for Dante Moore, of course, the quarterback who is in Ohio, is a Michigan kid, Martin Luther King Jr. High School out there. That's the biggest repercussion for me because if Michigan lands on their feet and they land a really good head coach, and they're able to just kind of, pick it up where it left off. Then Dante Moore, I think, it's not as big of an impact, but in a vacuum, losing your head coach is a huge loss. And especially for a quarterback that wants kind of a little bit of that security, right? Like as the kind of the mainstay of the offense. So he's a guy that I think is for me, the really big, kind of I don't want to say outlier, but he's the big impact potentially for Coach Harbaugh leaving. For 2022, man, we're going to scramble a little bit, right? Because most of the recruiting is done at this point. And there was another great question on the mailbag this week about like who I thought could be added to the 2022. And I just don't see anybody there for Notre Dame that they're really looking at. They were in the wide receiver market a little bit. They were in the running back to potentially add a second running back to Jadarian Price. Obviously, that numbers kind of didn't work out. So, I mean, just looking at the Michigan list, like I don't know who they are talking to right now, as a parent on this 2022 or 23 list. I mean, I could try to find a little more of kind of a kind of insight into that. I see someone putting Amorian Walker. At this point, I think that Amorian's, kind of tale is done with Notre Dame, to be honest with you. I don't see them getting back in that one, even if Coach Harbaugh leaves. So I don't think there's anybody that's, a foregone like poach from Michigan. I think more it's the guys that are on the board right now for 2023 and beyond that are heavy between Notre Dame and Michigan that are going to be most impacted.
Agreed. Okay. I know you're surprised to see this question, but it's kind of a twofer. Two of the biggest ones that you probably answer 1,000 times. We're putting it up here anyway. Savage Scion Fitness. What are we feeling about Keon Keeley after the Alabama visit? And how are we feeling about Carnell Tate as well?
I forget who put it on the message board, but they said this is about the millionth thread on Keon Keeley. It's so true, man. I get it. Trust me. Yeah. As a fan, I 100% get it. Keon Keeley is the top-ranked recruit in the class. Right. He is a bona fide 5-star. He's a fantastic ball player. He is 100%. There's no doubt about it. So I understand the franticness, obviously, of losing Coach Elston and what's going to happen to defensive line recruiting. I completely understand it. Keon Keeley, from all accounts, had a great Bama visit. And why wouldn't he, right? I mean, what are they going to sell it as? I'm Nick Saban. I've won this many national titles. I've done this for defense, producing them to the NFL. I have Will Anderson coming back, who's probably the best player in college football. Like, there's so many things that he's going to sell to Keon Keeley that he's going to listen to. How do I feel, though? Feel fine. I'm not worried at all. I'm really not. I think that we have talked about this a bunch with Brian specifically. There's a lot of layers to this conversation. There's a lot of layers. I think Notre Dame provides a lot for potential recruits. So I am not worried about this one at all after the visit. I think that Keon Keeley is very strongly Notre Dame. Could that switch? It's always possible. But coming out of the visit, I don't feel any different than I did before the visit. He's going to do his due diligence throughout the process. I know, again, it's unsettling to a degree, but I feel fine about Keon Keeley. Carnell Tate, I don't have a huge update on. I think that, he's listening to Notre Dame. I think it's going to be a tough pool, to be honest. But I think that, again, the big key cog there is if you land a guy like Dante Moore, I think that wide receiver recruiting changes very quickly. So I think that they're in the conversation. I wouldn't say that they're a favorite at this point. I would say it's a little bit of a long shot, but I think that he's open to the conversation right now, and we'll see how that trends. Again, if we get a guy like Dante Moore, if we start to pull in some pieces offensively, I think that changes a lot.
Absolutely. And Carnell Tate?
That's what I was talking about with Tate.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. All right.
I probably didn't preface it well enough.
No.
That last little spiel was about Carnell Tate.
Yep. I was looking for some more questions, so I was Anyway, Irish 1. Hey Ryan, is there anyone? This is a very specific question, so you might have to do a little bit of research here on the fly. Is there anyone at St. Thomas Aquinas, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, that Notre Dame might be looking at? If not, anyone in the deep South Florida?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm looking up the board right now. St. Thomas, off the top of my head, I don't think that there's anybody right now that is in there. Sorry. Yeah, I'm doing this.
I figured you'd have to do a little bit of research on this one because that is a very specific question. There's no doubt about
that. So Gulliver Prep, which is in Miami. I don't know. That's not deep South Florida, but
it's pretty south.
Yeah, it's pretty south, but I mean, I was thinking even deeper there. But a Gulliver Prep wide receiver, Jaylen Brown, is probably one of the top guys right now. He's going to be a tough pull, but we had Brian Smith on last week that talked a little bit about just how talented he was, seeing him in the 7-on-7 experience, and he is very close again to Dante Moore, and that's why I prefaced that with with Carnell Tate, right? That if they get a guy like him on board, I think things could change a lot for Notre Dame. So he's a guy that I think is, again, he's very open to the conversation, right? Like I would not call Notre Dame a favorite for Jaylen Brown, but I would call them a favorite for Jaylen Brown if they get a guy like Dante Moore. I feel that confidently about that relationship that they have, about just what I've heard from them. And I mean, they're doing their due diligence. I guess we can call IMG Academy. I mean, so they're in Bradenton, which is, so they're pretty deep. I mean, Notre Dame is definitely in contact with a lot of guys from IMG Academy. They just offered a linebacker there. They offered an offensive lineman, Kene Harris, recently as well. Carnell Tate is at IMG Academy. So yes, they are definitely deep into IMG Academy. And then Jaylen Brown's a guy from Gulliver Prep that I think they're really looking into as well.
All right. We do have a super chat here from Charlie Weiss's Last Belt Loop. Again, a top 5 name for sure. Mark, thank you for the super chat, Charlie. Marcus Freeman needs to call some Michigan kids and say, Jim doesn't appreciate you, like a dude trying to slide into your girl's DMs to win her over. Keep up the good work, IB, and have a good day, chat. That's a very 2022 reference. And obviously Charlie Weiss's Last Belt Loop is much younger than me. So I would say he's probably more your age than mine, with the whole sliding into the DMs thing. But a good point nonetheless, because look, if you're going to recruit against those guys, you want to use whatever you can. Now, I'm not saying to go in there and negatively recruit as a habit. That's not at all. But you can say, hey, where there's smoke, there's fire. If he's looking for another job and you're looking for somebody who's going to be stable and is going to be the head coach for as long as you're going to be here, you should be looking at Notre Dame. Like, I honestly don't have a problem with that because he is interviewing with places. He is talking to places. I mean, it's sure that's legit. I don't see that necessarily as negative recruiting. How do you think people are handling the whole Jim Harbaugh talk to the NFL?
I mean, how do you not use it against the program right now, right? I mean, again, like I'm not for the super negative recruiting either, but the reality is that Coach Harbaugh is exploring his options. Like, there's no doubt about it. And whether it's this season or next season, he's going to be in the conversation for a head coaching job elsewhere in the NFL. So it's going to be a continuous conversation. And as long as he's having those conversations, that means that there is interest there. I mean, is it going to happen this offseason? I mean, I know Minnesota just requested a conversation with him. I know Miami was kind of, eyeing the situation as well. So I think there's definitely interest. And as long as you're there, I would say, are you sure that Coach Harbaugh is in it for the long haul? Like, is he going to see the end of your playing careers? So I don't even think that's negative recruitment. Like, that's just real world. Like, that is exactly. Like he might not be there. That is the absolute conversation. So I think that it's a very valid approach to how you're going to, defeat Michigan per se, I guess.
John Rich, he says, I keep hearing about high school commits putting on weight. How much direction can Bayless et al. Have on helping them before they get on campus? I think this is a really good question, and one that if you don't follow recruiting super closely, you don't understand what that relationship is, but for the Notre Dame coaches and the strength staff with the committed guys and the signed guys for that matter.
Yeah. Well, it was funny. I was looking through my email and I found like when I was going to college, they sent you like a freshman summer workout sheet that you should be doing on your own until you report to campus. So you kind of, a lot of those guys get early kind of understandings of like what is expected of them and what kind of the routine's going to look like. So there's definitely input. And I think from the coach's perspective, even more than just Coach Bayless himself, is they're kind of talking about like, hey, this is where we think that your long-term outlook's going to be. And I talked about a guy like Jason Moore out of DeMatha Catholic, the defensive lineman. Like Notre Dame has definitely had conversations with him like, hey, we think that you might be an interior guy eventually, right? So you're 6'6", 270 pounds. You might be playing, 280, 285, 290 relatively early in your career. So I think there's some outlooks. There's obviously honesty that's going to go into that conversation as well. And then Coach Bayless gives you kind of the rundown. Any strength coach kind of gives you the rundown of like, hey, when you get on campus, you're mine. This is kind of how I do my workouts and all that type of stuff. And they usually send you like, this is a freshman orientation to how things should look before you get here, just because, obviously there's going to be improvements in form when you're lifting weights and all that good stuff. But for the most part, you should have like a general sense of like, this is how you power clean. This is how you hang clean. This is how you do miscellaneous exercises. So they're very involved in that process to figure out like how and there's a lot. I remember I talked to, sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second. I talked to Jeb Smith, who is the strength and conditioning coach at Northern Iowa. And I don't know if anybody that hasn't kept touch base with Val, they've done in the draft recently, but they do wonders with taking, very skinny players in college. Spencer Brown, who's starting right tackle for the Buffalo Bills now, Ellerson Smith, who was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, defensive end. They were both longer dudes that had frames, and they would actually project out 4 or 5 years from now. Like, this is what we think your body is going to look like. This is what we think that your body can hold. So
that's interesting.
Most colleges have projections, and they have an understanding of like, this is the plan that we need to do to get there. So heavily evolved is the short answer to your question there. But yes, Coach Bayless and his staff is going to be in constant communication with these kids, especially when they get onto campus, obviously. So
Blaine Tiller says, props to Notre Dame's newest preferred walk-on locally, Justin Fisher. Good kid, will challenge the roster to prep for Navy Week. I brought this up because I do his games,
nice.
All of his high school games since he's been a sophomore. He's been the starting quarterback at Mishawaka, which is obviously a local high school here, right? Adjacent to South Bend. And Notre Dame can't get a better kid. I mean, from a football standpoint, he is your prototypical triple option quarterback. He's been the starter since his sophomore year. He actually called the majority of the plays as a sophomore. So you can imagine as a junior and a senior, he just walks up to the line, analyzes the defense, calls the play, and they go. And he's been extremely successful. Had 6 touchdowns as a sophomore in a sectional championship game. I mean, he's a dude. He can play. And from a Notre Dame fit, obviously they're recruiting him to be that kind of Navy prep guy, which makes perfect sense. Chase Ketterer is that guy right now. He's going to be a junior. And so that means Justin would be 2 years removed to him. And that's kind of where you want things to be. And Justin could also probably play the fullback, I would think, in that offense as well. Dude is just a big dude. He dwarfs a lot of his teammates. Just a big dude, and he's got some wheels. So I think he's a good fit. He's got over a 4.0 GPA, so he's obviously a smart kid. So he's going to probably get academic money, I would imagine, as well, which will be helpful. I know his dad is a middle school principal, so just a blue collar, family and a great kid, and obviously dreamed of playing at Notre Dame. So I don't know that he's officially committed to being a preferred walk-on, but he just got that offer over the weekend, and very excited for him. I think it's a really good fit if he decides to go that route. He's got preferred walk-on offers from a couple other MAC schools as well, so like Ball State, I believe, is one. I forget what the other one is, but 2 MAC schools. He was looking at the academies, obviously triple option, not surprising there because he's a smart kid. So yeah, I think it's exciting. I think, again, we don't talk about preferred walk-ons very often, but since he's a local kid and I have a connection to him, I've had multiple conversations with him over the last 3 years, and he's just a great kid. He volunteers, to keep the scoreboard for like middle school games and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So he's just a good kid. So I think he's a Notre Dame guy, and I think that's exciting for him. So figure I'd take a couple minutes and talk about him.
That's awesome. Yeah. Now, Vince, I love that insight too. That's great. And I mean, you see every once in a while a former walk-on really takes on
absolutely
a big status with Notre Dame with guys like Joe Schmidt and Chris Fink and all those guys. So I love it. I think that's great insight.
And I think he could be good on special teams. I mean, he's the kind of kid who, when he's running the ball, like maybe this is a fault, but he like looks for contact to just like run guys over. You know what I mean? Because he's a bigger dude.
I love that.
He's not afraid to mix it up, man. So I could see him making an impact on special teams. I think that could be pretty exciting too. So, so congratulations to him. I think it's a good fit for Notre Dame. I think they made a good choice if that's where he ends up deciding to go.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a super chat here from David Knight. Thank you, David. There was a saying way back when that your stereo system was only as good as your weakest component. I think the same about coaches / position groups. I can't say I disagree with that, David. I mean, look, I think we can all, well, I don't know if everybody would agree, but I think offensive line was definitely a weak spot on the offense, and it changed the way they had to run the offense, right? I mean, they had to game plan around the offensive line. And I think that goes right to your point, David. So you're not wrong. You know, it's the whole, only as strong as your weakest link and all of those different things. I mean, that's absolutely accurate. And I think, there's 2 job openings now on the offensive side of the ball, and we'll see what Marcus Freeman ends up doing with that. But I just feel like this is a great opportunity for him to get guys in who are dynamic recruiters and young, energetic guys. And look, and somebody said it earlier, you're taking a chance. You're taking a chance bringing in young guys, right? So they're either going to hit it out of the park, with their potential, or it's not going to work out so well, and then we're going to have to see if Marcus Freeman is able to make an adjustment, make a change, because he would have been wrong, right? And so I think the potential is huge for this staff, and we'll see what direction they go with running back and tight end. But I like the opportunity for Marcus Freeman.
Yeah, I like that saying because I think it really does kind of speak volumes to everything, honestly. Like you're talking obviously from a coaching perspective, but it goes down to recruiting too, right? Like we spent some time talking about the wide receiver recruiting needs to be better in 2023. The defensive back recruiting, I think, needs to take a huge step in 2023, which it's off to a good start, obviously, with, a Don Schuler and Justin Brett and Peyton Bowen, obviously, but continuing to add pieces to the weakest position groups that you have on the roster, I think is paramount to continue to improve.
Absolutely. John Kristofic actually has a question about what we were just talking about. What is the difference between a walk-on and a preferred walk-on? You can correct me if I'm wrong here, Ryan, but I believe a preferred walk-on, you are guaranteed a roster spot. I mean,
correct.
You're on the team.
No tryout period. Yeah.
I mean, think of the movie Rudy, right? He had to try out to be a walk-on. They still have walk-on tryouts, and I believe it's during fall camp, or just before fall camp, I would imagine. So they have and so if you make the team from a tryout standpoint, you are a walk-on. If you are guaranteed a position like Justin would be, he was offered a position on the team, so he would be a preferred walk-on, so he doesn't have to go through that situation, and he would report just like the students report. He probably reports in the summertime with the other freshmen, go through summer school, all that fun stuff, as a preferred walk-on, right? So I believe that is the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like the fact, by the way, and this is nothing per se to Justin, I like the fact that they find a triple option quarterback to come on as a preferred walk-on. I think that makes a ton of sense with what they do, and they work with those guys throughout the year. They get like a group of guys that are running triple, and they're doing that, and they're, that's their role on the team. And I think if guys are willing to come to Notre Dame and foot the bill, I think that's a fantastic idea by Notre Dame. And I'm glad Marcus Freeman is continuing that where, Brian Kelly left off. I think it's a great idea.
Well, especially when you're only playing, in theory, one option team all year, right, with Navy. So it's a tough transition. So having a guy that specializes in it, I think, is paramount. And to everything you said about Fisher, it sounds like could potentially do some things on special teams maybe down the road, or so it's not just a one niche thing. Like he might have a role down the road. It's possible.
Absolutely. And I think it would be a lot. I mean, again, it's a local kid who I know, so I'm a little biased. I will be the first one to admit that, but I think he's a great fit. So let's see if we can find some more questions. Michael O'Brien is worried about the NIL carrot from Alabama to Keon Keeley.
I mean, we've talked about it a bunch, right? I think it's a understanding of the short term versus the long term with those conversations, right? Like there are obviously going to be programs that openly are, here's the money, right? Here's what we can offer you, type of thing, right? Like to be very, very point to it about that conversation. But a Notre Dame, while they may not do it to that degree, they can give you the education to how to best use the NIL opportunities. Brian keeps reiterating it, and I'll reiterate it again. Kyle Hamilton and Isaiah Foskey were two of the highest earning athletes based upon the name, image, likeness trend that is going on, obviously, in college football this past season. So Notre Dame can make money. Players can make money off of their name, image, and likeness just as much as anybody else. They're not going to maybe get the free handout at the beginning, but long term, I think it's about the education and how you use your name, image, likeness that's more important than just the short term.
In your limited experience up to this point, are you hearing anything about NIL from these guys, from these kids, or because you're kind of on a Notre Dame side of things, probably not hearing about it as much because I don't think a lot of the guys that Notre Dame's going to recruit are going to have their hands out.
Yeah, no, to be very transparent, I haven't heard any of the recruits that I've talked to, or even the parents that have kind of said NIL was even a layer to them. And I'm sure it is. I'm sure maybe it's just they're not as open to talking about it to a degree. But like, no, they haven't brought it up to me. I haven't even really pressed the issue as much because, again, I think that for Notre Dame, it's not as big a layer as obviously the short term versus the long term as some other schools. I mean, just in my opinion. So I haven't even pressed it. And people, recruits definitely haven't openly even started the conversation with me. So.
Yeah. I'm almost wondering what it's like behind the scenes and about that because it's played so much in our side of things, right? On the media side of things about NIL and handouts and all of these different things. I was curious to see if you had heard anything in your rumblings, but I guess I'm not overly surprised that you haven't because it's just not necessarily the kind of guys that Notre Dame's going to be going after. I mean,
I'm sure it'll come up at some point, but again, I think that the demographic of kid that I'm, talking to a lot, I think that there's a lot more things than just the NIL that is the appealing qualities to a Notre Dame specifically. So,
absolutely. Well, as I peruse the questions over here, I am not finding a whole lot left. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to wrap things up for our initial Notre Dame recruiting hour, which will be a staple here on Mondays, Ryan. And also 8 o'clock, you guys are going to be doing film breakdowns on Wednesday, right? And that's going to be a weekly staple as well, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So if everybody is not already on the premium message where I would go take a look in there, I've been dropping a lot of just kind of the tidbits that I'm getting with recruits, especially after the junior day. And then like Vince just said, every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time. Last week we did Drake Bowen, we did Keon Keeley, we did Brendan Vernon, so we did the front seven. This week we're going to be doing the secondary players that we talked about a little bit. So we're going to be talking about Justin Rhett, Adon Schuler, Peyton Bowen, talk a little bit about what makes them such fantastic football players, and then who are some players that maybe could fit, or what type of player is the best fit. So that is Wednesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern. Yes.
Excellent. So every Monday, Notre Dame Recruiting Hour, make sure you guys tune in. This is going to be a staple on the Irish Breakdown podcast. It'll either be myself or Brian, but it'll always be Ryan. So for Ryan Roberts, I'm Vince D'Addario. Make sure you get on those message boards and check it out because there's a ton of good information on there. Ryan just referenced it. But make sure you get on there. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell because you never know when there's breaking news. And if you're listening to us on a podcast, give us a 5-star review and make sure you are subscribed. So again, for Ryan, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.